and welcome to Chabad of Kerry. My name is Rabbi Yisrael Kotler, and you are tuning into our live stream of Lunch and Learn, where we look at the Torah's eternal truths and apply them to our lives today. Today we will be looking at the Sfirat Omer, the 49 days of counting that we do between Pesach and Shavuot. But by means of introduction, we live in a 24/7 world today. You have access to everything at every time. So many things are easier. Want to deposit a check, you do it on your phone. Don't have to run to the bank anymore. You want to have access to anything, like an airline ticket. Everything is always going, and we always can do things. But one of the challenges with that is how often do we work on ourselves? Have time to work on our character flaws and to work on perfecting who we are. And we're going to see today how Sfirat Omer, the 49 days between Pesach and Shavuot, really affords us this opportunity. What I love about this idea is often we look at Kabbalah or Jewish mysticism as like the last layer. First you have the basic understanding of Torah, maybe then the Talmud, and then if you go enough deeper and deeper and deeper, we come to a mystical spin. Sometimes, though, you have a question on an idea in Torah, and the only good answer is the mystical one. It's not like the mystical one is the icing on the cake. It's almost where it begins. And I find Sfirat Omer, the 49 days of counting between Pesach and Shavuot, to be an example of that. Because if you were to ask someone what it is all about today, they'll often give you an answer that's not from the Chumash, perhaps not even from the oral tradition, that's from Kabbalah. It became that popular and that normal in the world that is the reason that is given for it. Of course, if I ask people around the table, what does the Bible actually say about these 49 days between Pesach and Shavuot? Anyone? What does the Torah say about these 49 days?
Sacrifices you bring to the temple.
That's it. There's a sacrifice you bring, an offering you bring on Passover. There's another offering you bring on the Festival of Weeks, called Shavuot. And between those two dates, what are you to do? Between those two dates? Count. That's all. Huh? What? Why? It happens to be, this is when, kids are getting out of school. So we used to always, count down the Omer, count down till school is out. Those two always went. But the Torah is so terse, and that's what I love about this. Without mysticism, without spirituality, it's hard. And what we're going to do today is we're not going to jump straight into the famous explanation for the Omer. We're going to start from the beginning, what the Torah actually says, what others say.
I guess a question. Why did they count up rather than count down? In other words, you go to 23rd, 24th. Why don't you go how many days to Shavuot rather than how many days from?
A very good question. And although the class doesn't directly address that, I think the answer to that will be apparent at the end. Hal, you were going to suggest something?
Yeah.
We'll wait till the end. I think that by doing the class, we will get the answer to that as well. Let us begin with what the Torah actually says about this mitzvah. Howard, why don't you begin page 64? This is from Leviticus 23. I'm sorry.
Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when you come to the land which I am giving you, and you reap its harvest, you shall bring to the priest on Omer from the beginning of your reaping.
An Omer is a biblical measurement of grain. Again, we don't live in an agrarian society today, but it was a pretty big deal in the old days. The whole winter you're waiting, praying that it's going to rain. Passover time is when you're starting to harvest. And the Torah says, right when you reap its harvest, you need to bring the Kohen in Omer from the beginning of your harvest. Now, what mitzvah does this sound very much like? Another example of this. Another example of, here it was, you should take the first grain and you should take the first from your harvest and bring it to the Kohen. More than 64, Debbie. What other mitzvah does this sound like? How?
I missed the question.
Which other mitzvah does this sound like? If we're looking for meaning in what this Omer is about, isn't there another example in the Torah where you would bring the first of something to the Kohen? First fruits.
Child.
Oh, well, we have first child, we have first fruits. You were thinking first what?
First child.
Okay.
First lamb.
First lamb. So we have this notion in Torah where whenever we have a bracha, whenever we have a blessing in our life, we are to show appreciation by taking the best and giving it to tzedakah, rather than the typical mindset. All right, I got to give a little charity after I've done everything else. If there's something left at the end, then maybe we'll make a line item for this. Torah wants us to look at it the other way around. So some of the most basic explanation for this is from the Alshich, text 2. This is about appreciation. Text 2, please. This is from Rabbi Moshe Alshich, who lived in the 1500s.
There is nothing that makes a man cocky and arrogant and causes him to sin more than having abundant good fortune. All this causes one to not look towards the God who provided the bounty. They forget and claim that their own might and power brought them their success. Therefore, our Father in heaven loves us and teaches us the proper outlook. As soon as the sky falls from the stalks of barley, the first of all grains, before our hearts swell at the sight of the bounty in the home and in the field, God comes to teach us. The earth and everything therein belongs to God. Man's power is nothingness, for everything is nothingness.
And you know, the Jews were not allowed, the Omer was interesting, the Jews were not allowed to eat the grain, their own grain, until the Omer was brought as a community. The community, this Omer was not like the first fruits in which every person brought their own. This was done one for the community.
But it was harvested, right?
It was harvested? Correct. They harvested the grain. They had a community offering where you brought one Omer of it. After that, everyone was allowed to eat from their produce. It was to keep people's pride in check. Recognize where the blessings come from. It was a big deal if you were a farmer in Israel and you thought, wow, what an amazing, year of crops. This gave the person humility. Okay.
I assume an Omer is a pretty good sized portion.
It is. Yeah. Anyone have their app that has biblical measurements on it? No?
Yeah.
You don't?
For the counting the almanac.
Right, but what is the amount here? The Omer is an actual measurement of grain. So if someone has their phone, I'm sure they can Google the conversion rate of from pound to Omer. Wait, volume. There we go. Marty, you doing that?
Yeah.
Thank you. So let me know when you have an answer what the Omer is. Now, all right, everything is fine. The Torah tells us, bring the first, then enjoy it yourself. That makes sense. But the very next verse in the Torah is what throws us all off. Text 3.
And you shall count for yourselves from the morrow of the rest day, from the day you bring the Omer to a wave offering, 7 weeks they shall be complete. Until the day following the 7th week shall you count, up to 50 days, on which you shall bring a new meal offering to God.
So the Torah doesn't just say bring the Omer offering. The day after you bring the Omer offering, start counting. How long do you count? This is a little confusing. It says 2 different things.
Yeah, it says 7 weeks and then there's the 50 days.
The 50 days, yeah.
It's odd.
One Omer is 9.30 dry cups.
9 cups.
Oh, that's
Not so much.
So it's a
It's a bit over a quart.
It's not too much at all.
That's a
Well,
little
you
over
just
half a
get a
gallon.
little white, the little tops.
Okay.
So that takes a lot to fill it up.
Okay.
But it would take, 5 bushels of it?
I've never planted grain. I don't know. Not all that much.
No.
So it was certainly more symbolic. It wasn't about that the Kohen was going to eat it. It was more of the notion that the first goes to tzedakah.
But
So-
if all the
If everybody
people
brings-
Then it would be
Everybody brings a
significant.
half a gallon of grain,
Yeah.
in essence.
It would be good.
Let's
Yeah.
add it up.
That would add up. That would add up. But the counting. Count 50 days. All the Torah says is from the day after the Omer until the Festival of Weeks, count 7 weeks and count 50 days. And the Torah doesn't say what it's about. The Torah does not say what it's about. However, we know that in halacha, this is a law that doesn't just apply to biblical times. It applies to everyone today. Here it is in the Code of Jewish Law, text 4. Brian?
It is a biblical mitzvah that every Jew should count 7 weeks of days, beginning from when the Omer sacrifice is offered. The sages expounded upon the words, count for yourself. It might be thought that it is the rabbinic court who conducts this count, in the same way that the rabbinic court counts the seven-year cycles and then sacrifices the 50th year as the Jubilee year. But count for yourself teaches us that each and every person must do the count. The congregational representatives are unable to count on behalf of the public.
The Hebrew words are Usfartem lachem. Sfartem means to count. Lachem in Hebrew means lachem.
To them.
Right. Oh, no, not to them, to you. You should count for yourselves. You should count for yourselves 70 days, 7 weeks. And the Talmud learns from there that it's an individual count. This is not a community count. This is not like other counts where the Bet Din would count, the Jewish court would count 49 years and the 50th year would be the Jubilee year. This is different. This is an individual count. It is a mitzvah incumbent on every single person to say day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, all the way until you get till the 50th day. I've pointed this out in class before, but I'll say it briefly again here. What makes this so unique is that the holiday that happens on the 50th day is not even given a date in the Torah. The Torah does not say that the holiday, which we call Shavuot, has to happen on a particular date. All it says is the holiday of Shavuot has to happen 50 days after Pesach. And one of the incredible differences even until today is that if someone crosses the international date line during the counting of the Omer, they will celebrate Shavuot on a different day than everyone
Well,
else.
because it's when they were counting.
Correct.
It would be there 50 days.
Correct.
Even when you cross the line.
There's no other holiday that's like that. Every other holiday, the Torah gives a date to. You celebrate Passover on the 15th day of Nisan. I don't care if it's been 364 days since last Pesach or 365 days, depending on whether you traveled or not. Shavuos doesn't have a date. It's 50 days for you.
So if
You
you
flew-
miss a day, then you.
If you miss a day, you didn't count, but you still had 50 days pass. You're okay.
Yeah, okay.
But if you didn't even have 50 days count, you crossed the date line, one way or the other.
You got that.
I've lived in Australia before for a couple years. You leave on Tuesday and you get there on Thursday or Tuesday to Tuesday, depending on which way you're going. You actually have Shavuot on a different day. And believe it or not, in Jewish communities in New York or Melbourne, they will have sometimes even a minion of people who will do their own Torah reading on a different day, one day later. But that's all parenthetical. Let's go back to this. The other interesting thing in halacha is not only are we supposed to count the days, but we also count days and weeks. For instance, look at what the Siddur says, page 67. Virgil, do you want to read?
Which read in 5 days? Oh, 8. Today, 8 days, which is 1 week and 1 day to the other.
Okay, today's 8 days. Excuse me, I need some water. So the way we count the Omer today is that we do mention both days and weeks. We say 8 days, which is 1 week and 1 day. Why do we do that? Because the verse also mentions 7 weeks and mentions 50 days. So, these traditions aren't born out of nowhere. This comes from the verse. The verse says count 7 weeks, count 50 days. As a result, We need to count both. But why?
50 days seems shorter than 7 weeks.
Does it?
No, it's
That's
49
too
days.
bad.
What it is the 50th day is that next holiday. So you're counting 49 days, and the 58th is that next holiday. But what would be the reason for that? If there is some meaning to counting, why would we have to count both weeks and days? I'm going to go back to what I said at the beginning. I'm asking these questions because there's no sufficient answer to these questions other than Jewish mysticism, other than spirituality. If you're looking for a logical or a Talmudic answer, you're not going to find it. This is an area where you need to come to spirituality. Okay.
Can I ask,
Sure.
ask a question? This is going back, plus my mind is kind of wandering around. On the word
Lachem.
lachem, is it the same letters as lechem?
It is, one lechem has a chet and this has a chaf. So it actually is a different word. Lechem is bread, and that is with a chaf.
Okay,
This is,
I just didn't know.
exactly.
Because
This
I mean,
is,
grains.
Yeah. I
this
heard
is,
that.
yeah, this is a different word.
So
Yeah.
I remember from our past lessons
Sure.
that each week has a different theme, which I'm sure comes from mysticism. But what I'm really surprised at, there's an open question here in the text. How come the Talmud didn't address it? The Talmud addresses everything at length, oftentimes.
Why was this
I mean,
left a
it's
mystery?
It's a suspicious gap.
Why would this be left a mystery
Yeah.
until much later in history where we have Kabbalah written down? Now, I will tell you that the mystical traditions were passed down, but they weren't written down.
Even so, I'm not saying why we have mysticism. Why
Well,
don't
why
we
does the
have Talmud?
Why does the Talmud not tell us the symbolism of the days and the weeks here? I mean, why count both?
And also the Talmud represents, the debate of the sages
Correct.
and whatnot, and it's silent. It's really quite
Exactly. We'll see in a moment what is there.
okay.
When it says count for yourselves, it seems like that is such a core issue of it, that it's at the lowest local level possible, that it's each person's, I don't know what you want to call it, duty, responsibility, or innate, motivation. Like when we said, they said, give of your own accord, and we never stopped giving. So in the same way, this is another similar thing. For yourself, do it for yourself. Take from what God has given you, everything God has given you, and recognize it and give. When you recognize it, then you will give.
Right.
And
it has
and
to be personal.
It could happen at any time.
But that also connects. That shows how the verse is very much showing right away there's a mystical meaning to it.
Uh-huh.
Lachem. The word lachem shows this is a very personal mitzvah, which is going to be the deeper meaning in a moment. One more very interesting, more of a halachic tidbit, which is also interesting about this. Let me paraphrase 6a, but then we'll do 6b. There's a debate in the Talmud whether it is one mitzvah or if it's 49 mitzvot. All right? Do we say the mitzvah is to count 49 days, and it's one mitzvah made up of 49 different chunks? Or is each day you count its own mitzvah? What is the practical difference between the two? Well, A is how many check marks do I get? But B is, if I mess up somewhere along the way, can I continue or can I not? Can I start counting today? We're all around the table today. We may not have known about this or remembered to do it beforehand. Can we start today or can we not? And in the final analysis, 6b,
In the final analysis, if one forgot to count one of the nights, the custom is to count the rest of the nights without making a blessing, whether it was the first night that he forgot to count or any of the other nights. This is because of the rule. Whenever there is doubt whether a blessing is to be made, we are lenient.
hold it there. So in the final analysis, you should still start counting from today. However, the blessing, which is Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al Sfirat Omer, on the counting of the Omer, you can only say that prior to your counting if you did the count every single day. Otherwise, you just count without the bracha.
So is that what that means, that if you miss one day, going for the other 7 or 29 days?
You don't no longer say the blessing.
Well, you know what, the little app pops it up anyhow.
And it doesn't have a little asterisk there, whether or not you've already.
Well, you know what it says, you know what, you had to pray before 7:41. You know, did you pray before 7:41?
Did you say last night's before? Yeah. So, what is this suggesting? This is odd. I mean, if you didn't do a mitzvah, when else in Judaism?
Are you told not to
I didn't give.
pray?
You're right. I didn't do something yesterday, so I can't do it today. I mean
Yeah.
Doesn't make.
Doesn't
right.
sound
Yeah.
right.
Don't do tefillin today because you didn't do it yesterday. Don't give tzedakah today because you didn't do it yesterday. It's odd.
The
So-
second Pesach.
Well, that's good. There's a second. So there, but that is the regular theme. There's a second chance. How come here there is not? Again, this alludes to a more mystical spin on what's happening. So again, our questions are: what are weeks and days about? What is the counting in general about? And why does halacha seem to emphasize the importance of all 49 days having to be counted in order to say the bracha? I know for me it's a challenge when I used to live in an area in which I davened 3 times a day with the minyan. So you have that daily reminder to count the Omer because everyone else doesn't. Here, I still pray daily, but it's very easy to slip because no one's reminding me. You got to remind yourself. It's one of the challenges of going to a small town. That's where the app is important.
Yeah, it does.
So so far I'm good.
You
Thank
put-
God.
You put the book right where you sit for dinner.
There we
And that's,
You've done that, Hal?
that's what I do, so.
Hal? L'chaim. Wow. You're still
Don't
going.
forget.
But it's it's an old thing. Are you still on a bracha? Like in observing communities. Are you still counting with the bracha? Are you still counting with the bracha? That's what they say. Okay.
Well, that's how they know if you miss. Huh?
And then there's something else. Usually the chazan, the one who leads the service, will say the bracha out loud, and then everyone else will say after him. So every now and then you have the guy who's the chazan, but then he has to embarrassingly, I can't say it, someone else do it in front of me because they've already messed up their day, and it happens. Mistakes happen, but it's funny. Okay. What does the Talmud actually say about the reason for counting? It doesn't get mystical. It talks agricultural. It gives us some perspective, but it doesn't answer the questions we asked about the weeks and the days and all one. Text 70. Where are we up to?
Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Rabbi Akiva, why did the Torah tell us to bring the Omer offering on Passover? Because Passover is the time of produce. God says, bring an Omer to me on Passover, so that I will bless for you the produce in the fields. And why did the Torah tell us to bring Shtai Halakam on Shavuot? Because Shavuot is the time of the fruits of the tree. God says, bring the Shtai Halakam to me on Shavuot, so that I will bless for you the fruits of the tree.
So all it says is this counting is related to agriculture. On a paraphrase, text 71, we can only imagine how nervous people were during these days if you were a farmer in Israel. This is your livelihood. Everything is dependent on how well these things do. These were probably intense days of prayer. So the Talmud says, what was the counting about? Days of reflection, days of prayer. They're counting until they can be assured that it was a good crop. So, makes sense. It doesn't. What? You can have a late freeze. You can have storms.
You can live in California.
There we go. So that's what it says. God, I'm just paraphrasing the next one, commands us to count these days, highlighting the world's anxiety to do teshuvah, and we can't get our job done in the world if there ain't flour. That's what the Talmud writes. This satisfies somewhat the question of counting, meaning, why count here and not between any other 2 sacrifices? Why don't we count between, I don't know, Yom Kippur and Passover? We could do a big count there too.
Yeah.
So the Talmud says this was a count that was related to agricultural stress and prayer. Yeah.
That's not very satisfying though, because then they just use the date. I mean, our calendar adjusts dates. I mean, lunar, solar, but
That's why I began with, I really don't think there is a sufficient answer until we come to the mystical.
Does it have anything to do historically with the agricultural, previous generations that had, well, I don't want to say idolatry, but agricultural rituals that they performed to thank for the abundance that they received, and
You're saying like a Native American rain dance and whatnot. So this is a Jewish counting. No, is that what? Right. You're saying this is a Jewish ritual
right.
that we do during the days.
This
Right.
is a seasonal, a seasonal accounting of what's happening.
Yeah.
When is it over? What is the
This
October,
year-
spring, right?
Yeah, this year, May 23rd, 24th is the holiday.
Because you know what, most of your crops aren't gonna come in till June. Even if
Here.
you're down here,
Well,
Yeah, I'm not sure about the Middle
East.
East. Yeah.
The Middle East.
but we're sort of on the same, way, minus the desert temperatures. I'm kind of straight.
So here's where enter the world of the Kabbalah. We need it. And here is one of the few times where in all Siddurim, not just people that are more mystically inclined, not just in Chabad or other more groups of Jews that study Kabbalah, all Siddurim have this prayer. As soon as you finish counting the Omer, you say this prayer. Here goes, Debbie. Or how did you read that yet or not? Oh, I'm sorry. Text 9. I'm skipping to 9 now.
Master of the universe, you have commanded us through Moses, your servant, to count Sfirat in order to purify us from evil and uncleanliness. You have written in your Torah, you shall count for yourself from the day following the day of rest, from the day in which you bring the Omer as a wave offering. The counting shall be for 7 full weeks. Until the day following the 7th week shall you count, up to 50 days, so that the souls of your people Israel may be cleansed from their defilement. Therefore, may it be your will, Lord of God and God of our fathers, that in the merit of the Sefer Ha'amah, which I counted today, the blemish that I have caused in the Sefer of that day, be rectified, and that I may be purified and sanctified with His eternal holiness. May abundant bounty therefore be bestowed upon all the world. May it rectify our nefesh, ruach, and neshama from every baseness and defect. And may it purify and sanctify us with eternal holiness. Amen. I'll be honest, I wish I said this all year round. It's one of the prayers that just resonates so beautifully with me. You've commanded us to count the Omer in order to purify us and remove our blemishes. God, in the merit of today's counting, I should purify today's Sfirat. This is mystical. And here is where we get into the 49 days, referring to a mystical dimension, every day having its particular Sfirat. This is a universal prayer. This is very mystical. Yes?
What is that, it starts out because of the disturbance we caused in the Bet something.
That was the Holy Temple in Jerusalem.
Okay.
So it starts off saying in the old days, there was actual offerings that were brought in the Holy Temple. Today we're counting, but we don't have the agricultural part of it.
And then the Ruach, even though I tell myself every day, why don't you go look that up?
Ruach, Nefesh, Neshama are different dimensions of our soul. On a very basic level, Nefesh is the more functional level of our soul. Ruach is the more emotional dimension of our soul. Neshama is the more spiritual or intellectual dimension of our soul. And we're saying that today's counting should achieve a tahor, a purification of our souls in a particular Sfirat.
So I have
Yeah.
a question too. In here it says worlds, plural.
Mm.
Upon all the worlds.
We're only living in this physical world. But what we're saying is, rather than looking at it as if there's God, and there's these spiritual realities, and then it trickles down to our world, and we're the last stop, right? Because Kabbalah does speak about spiritual dimensions and spiritual worlds with Sefirot or spiritual beings. What it's saying here is, when we do what's right here, it changes the cosmos, the spiritual cosmos as well. We should look at it as if it's a rope that the bottom is over here, but when we give a tug, it has a ripple effect above as well. So it's not just that the rope goes this way, the flow is downwards, the flow is upwards as well. Think of every mitzvah that we're doing affecting everything, and God forbid when the world becomes dirty in sin and evil, that makes impurity everywhere. So that would be the meaning of it. Yeah.
Because that's just one of the questions I've always had my whole life. If we are one, all is one. Okay, what happens? And I know this is a question you asked even as a kid.
Right.
But what happens if everybody turned evil? Would God himself turn evil?
So, first of all, we have an assurance from God. That's not going to happen.
But you know what I mean? Doesn't he absorb the sin?
So this is there's a lot in Kabbalah about, on one hand, God creating a world and being involved in the world, but on the other hand, God remaining unaffected by what goes on. This is a complex conversation. We should have an entire class on how you can create something but still be above it. In Judaism, if you ask the question, is God immanent or transcendent? Meaning, is God in everything or is God above? Right. The answer is, as Hal always says, yes. There's both components.
It's today's Tanya.
And I didn't do today's Tanya yet.
Yesterday.
So while on one hand we believe in divine providence and things happening for a reason and God pulling all the strings down here, on the other hand, there's a dimension of godliness that is above that. To word it in simple terms, what percentage of, we know what our flash drives, our USB sticks, what percentage of God's hard drive is consumed with the operations of the world, How many gig does that take up? What percentage? So what would be the answer according to the higher dimension of God? 0%. From the lower perspective, there's divine providence, God's involved, but there is a place in which God is above the world and is not consuming God. But this is
Well, you look what's going on in the world, you would say it's above.
But this is a great conversation. How you want to, any thoughts on that?
We're finite beings and God is infinite. So if God gave God's light in total to us, without any filters, we would go poof. It's like if the power line coming into this house had no filters to get it down to 120 volts, it would just destroy the house. Now that does not mean that God isn't totally within us. It's just from our perspective, there are a lot of these filters so we can survive. It's like if the rabbi taught a master's class.
She didn't like something you said, Hal.
He would teach at one level, but when he teaches, let's say in New York at Potty, has the discussion at one level. But if he taught the preschool the same subject, he has to filter it all the way down so that they can absorb the light of his teaching. So God has filtered it down. Now, he hasn't lost the total knowledge. God hasn't lost the total light. He just filtered it down for our sake so that we can survive in a finite world.
So you always will see, well said, you will always see both components in Kabbalah. On one hand, God being unaffected. On the other hand, we'll talk about our own soul having the 4 letters of God in it, the Yud and the Hey and the Vav and the Hey. And when we soil one of those, guess what? God is in some manner affected as well. So we have both components. So, yeah.
And Anne said something that really resonated with me, and which is children need to be able to understand, because I immediately thought back to when I was a child, World War II.
Yeah.
And I said to my rabbi, how could God allow such a thing, such terrible things to happen? And I didn't get an answer. I did not get it. I got a do not question was the way.
And this
Now,
was in the years.
hopefully
This was in the
today-
years just after the war.
During.
Or during.
Yes.
I mean,
right.
during the And
I
now
was
we're going to
very
something
young.
else, 50s, 60s. You know, it was so, the pain was so raw. There was not theological discussions on it. Not to say that we have great answers today, but there's a conversation today about this more than there
Well, I
was
was young,
in the times.
but old
right
enough to
afterwards.
remember that
Having
was
that.
the way I was answered, and I
Sure.
always remember that. And I think it's a very, very important issue that
Absolutely.
you said as a child, that children do
Sure.
think this way
Sure.
and need to be taught at a very young age.
All right, so we'll go forward now with the mystical. So now we know that there's these 49 Sefirot. Each day we're supposed to purify. Finally, here we do have not Kabbalah, we have a Midrash. And the Midrash gives us, for the first time, the perspective that we're actually counting down to a specific day, the giving of the Torah. That is not in the actual Chumash. Text 10.
Why do
Debbie,
we
yeah.
count the days between Passover and Shavuot more so than any other festival? This can be compared to a king who was out riding and found a man who had been cast into a pit. The king told him, I will pull you out of this pit, and on this day and this day I will give you my daughter as a wife. The man grew tremendously happy and said to himself, not only will he take me out of this pit, but he also wants to give me his daughter. And the king did just that. He took the man out of the pit, dressed him in fine clothes, and gave him gold and silver. When the man saw that the king was true to his word, he began to count the date when the king had pledged he would give him his daughter. The Jews in Egypt were as if in a pit.
Anyone want to continue the ... The giving of the Torah is our marriage to God. This is a powerful medrash. Now, again, you can ask, how come this was absent in the actual Chumash? This is such an important clue as to why we are counting. We were taken out of Egypt. God takes us out of a pit. But when you get engaged, there's a lot of work you have to do before the wedding. Now, most people unfortunately focus more on the practical sides. They got to get the photographer and the flowers and the catering hall. That's all true. But equally important is what it means to be a spouse. Sometimes people spend far more effort on wedding preparation than marriage preparation. Wedding one day, marriage, God willing, much longer. The Jews have to not just prepare physically for getting the Torah, they got to learn what it means to be a good spouse. They were slaves in Egypt, and they have 49 days to get ready to be a spouse for God and enter into an eternal covenant. To go from a world where you're a bachelor and can do whatever you want and just, that's the way I like it, to 1 + 1 = 1. And now it's a complete paradigm shift where now you're in a relationship, now you matter, now you gotta work with someone else. And in order to do that, there's soul searching that has to happen. They gotta purify themselves because Shavuot is the wedding day. Now we can understand, Marty, your question. If the goal was, I just can't wait till Shavuot comes, we're getting the Torah quickly, let's run and get the Torah, that would perhaps be counting down. You tear off another day. This is not about counting down. This is about working up to the point where you're worthy, where you're able to become married to God at the giving of the Torah. Each day is another step forward because you've worked on one additional character trait. Again, I haven't seen that specifically mentioned anywhere, but I think that what you were going to suggest also, Hal? It's the counting up versus counting down.
And you're also adding to yourself at each point when you count Sefirot, then you go to another emotional level, and then another cleansing emotional level. So you were growing spiritually, so that you went from Mitzrayim, the narrow place, to the giving a Torah, the biggest, fattest place you can be. I mean, there's nothing more spiritual than what happened at Mount Sinai. So you went from 0 to infinity in 49 days. So it was a huge growing.
Yeah,
And we're supposed to retrace that.
Here's where I'm getting confused. So now we start off with there was
Bet
no
Hamikdash.
temple, when they were getting this, and then they stuck the temple.
So in the Chumash, in the Bible itself, it doesn't make note to the fact that it's 49 days that they were counting to getting the Torah. It only mentions an agricultural ritual that took place at the temple. It's only our oral tradition that lets us know. You want to know really why the counting happened? It wasn't just about counting for some ritual that they had in the temple. This was retracing the steps of the Jewish people when they left Egypt. And those are the steps that we do every year. But we need Jewish tradition for that. We need Midrash. And we need the Kabbalah to understand why 49 specifically. And why the 49 is because there are, again, these 7 traits. We'll do them in a moment very quickly. And each trait has a week that we dedicate towards improving that trait. However, each trait is made up of the 7 traits. So therefore, essentially, what are we doing? We're counting every week, but we also have to count the specific days. Now we have a mystical answer for why there is both. We need to work on this trait, which is the entire week's project, but we also have to find that trait within that trait. Marty, question.
Well, it just seemed like God was overly optimistic to think of 49 days because the Jewish people weren't really ready for the Torah when he gave it to them. So when he's saying, well, the expectation is they're going to get married, I don't know why God was so optimistic when he thought 49 days.
I think it's a very good question. I think that everything in the Torah has the historical at the time and the eternal. At the time, they had a journey to do. But God is saying, it's not done then. It happened for them on their level, and it happens to us today on our level. So, you're right. They were far from over, and the proof is what happened 40 days after that, where they had the golden calf. Not 49, 40. The next set is 40 days. Yes?
That's what I was going to ask. The first tablets were prior to 49 or post 49?
No, even the first tablets were post 49. Really, let's go through it again. They counted 49 days. They got the Torah. After they got the Torah, Moses went up to actually receive the tablets. When they got the Torah, they just had the revelation. They didn't have the actual tablets. He came down 40 days later with the first tablets, broken, and went up again afterwards. So we're out of time here, but let's quickly do these 7. The first week is when we work on our capacity for kindness, for giving selflessly just because of the other person. There's some people that this comes easy to. There's some people that this comes harder to. The first week is when we work on chesed. The next week is when we work on givura, which is discipline. Some people are naturally far more calculated. They're tough on themselves and they're tough on others. There's room and there's a time and place for givura. We have to ask ourselves, when are we too tough on ourselves? When are we too tough on others? When is my givura translating into anger or jealousy? When is my gevurah being expressed in a healthy way? The third week is beauty, Tiferet. Some people, and there's so many different dimensions of Tiferet, but some people are artistic and they do things in a beautiful way, and there's a time and place for the grandiose beautification of things. It can also lead to an unhealthy pride and an ego and an arrogance as well. But what do you think Tiferes of Chesed is? Not just am I doing the mitzvah, but I'm doing the mitzvah in a grandiose, beautiful fashion. Okay, so everyone get how each one works within Chesed? What would Gevura of Chesed be? Okay, Gevura is discipline or anger even sometimes.
If you were just Hesed, you would love every woman as you love Hannah. You have to put a limit on it with Gevura.
So Gevura helps channel your Chesed into an appropriate place. Netzach is determination, perseverance, the ability to overcome obstacles, competitiveness. What would that mean within Chesed? That I give even when it's difficult. I'm hell-bent on giving no matter what. That would be Netzach. Hod is the opposite. Netzach is when you fight. Hod is when you let go. We have a whole week of Hod. That's actually the week we're in now. It's sometimes you fight it. Sometimes you let go. You let things be as they are. You let things resolve. But
And that's hard, right?
Hod. Then we have Yesod, which is the incredible ability to connect with people deeply. We know certain people that are very sociable, and when they connect, they're connectors. And finally, Malchut is the actual execution of the activity. It's getting things done. It's leadership. Unfortunately, because of time, we don't have time to go through all of them today. But if you do download that app, it gives you the particular exercise of each one of the days, and how amazing it is to actually dedicate time every single day to working on a particular character trait. This is the mystical spin of Sfirat to Omer, which has become, I would say, so normal in the community that not everyone even realizes this is no more than a mystical spin that is shared. Do we also understand why there's an opinion that says it's one long mitzvah? Remember, there was an opinion that said if you miss a day,
Why no more prayer?
because it's a process, meaning you're trying to go from here to there, you have to make it through every single step to really do it successfully.
But
At the
what
same
if,
time,
but
guess what?
Yeah.
Even if you don't get all the parts, there's still value
all you
to
do,
working on parts. So that's why the tradition still is to continue counting, even if you didn't do yet.
but you just don't do the prayer, which you think would.
You don't do the
that.
bracha. You still do the prayer. You don't do the bracha.
Oh,
You
okay.
still do the prayer.
That's
think,
the
yeah.
Okay, and the other.
There's a rule that when in doubt, you don't make a bracha, but you still say the prayer.
But why? Why is that? Why? I don't understand that. It seems like to me you would want to encourage people to pray no matter what.
You're still
Even
praying no
after
matter
prayer.
what.
But I mean that one.
The saying God's name in the form of a bracha is considered proceed with caution. We don't want to do it for no reason. So therefore, there are many times in halacha when, let's say I'm eating a food and I don't remember whether or not I made a bracha or not. If I certainly didn't make the bracha on the salad and I realized 2 minutes later, I didn't make a bracha on the salad, I make a bracha now. If I was in doubt, I can say thank you, God, for the food in my own kind of nice little way, but I don't say God's name in a form of a bracha when in doubt. It's a general rule throughout Torah.
Okay. That one I understand.
All right, I guess we will hold it over here. Any questions from online? All right, thank you everyone for joining us. A special thanks to Amnon, Nissan Communications, for making this available to people all over the world.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. Our weekly lineup of call-in programs includes Computers 2K Now with Amnon Nissan, Health In with Debbie Bruck, Breaking Free with Marilyn Shannon, Lessons of Vietnam with NCBVI members, The Tanya Love Show, Your Healthy Pet with Gisela DiCarlo. And if you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it at www.nissancommunications.com. Sponsored by Atomus.com, makers of quality video recorders and converters for professionals, CarolinaApparel.com, and DeltaForce.net.